Sponsored by Rabbi Shlomi and Mirala Greenwald. This is a Sicha from Likutei Sichos, Chelek Alef, Parshas Beshalach, Sicha Alef. The topic of the Sicha is that in this week's Parsha we learn how when the Yidden saw the Mitzrim chasing them, they became afraid and they were mispal to Hashem. And there's a Rashi over here on this that the Yidden were mispal to Hashem. And in the Sicha itself, the Rebbe will ask 5 questions on the Rashi, and he will answer the 5 questions. In the continuation of the story of the Yidden leaving Mitzrayim and the Mitzrim chasing after them, it says in our Parsha, Upare Hikriv, and Pare drew near, Vayisu bnei Yisrael aseineim, and the Yidden lifted their eyes, Vihine Mitzrayim noiseya achareim, and behold, Mitzrayim is advancing after them. Vayiru ma'od, and they were very frightened, Vayitzaku bnei Yisrael el Hashem. And the Bnei Yisrael, the Yidden, cried out to Hashem. And Rashi copies the word Vayitzaku from the pasuk, and he explains Tafsu umanus avaisam. They grasped the umanus, the craft of their fathers. And then Rashi continues with a further explanation, as we'll see later on in the Sicha. And there are a number of questions here. We put number 1 and number 2 together in the first question. So number 1 and number 2 is, what's difficult over here in the pasuk that compels Rashi to give his explanation? Why is there a need for any explanation? It's understood simply that when the Yidden saw the Mitzrim chasing after them, so they cried and Davenned to Hashem to save them. And we can't say that it's coming to negate the explanation that Vayitzaku means that the Yidden complained. And why would we want to say that that's what it means? Since only then is the next part, where it says later in the pasuk that they complained and they said, Ma zeisa sisalanu, only then is that part understood. We can understand that the Yidden complained, Vayitzaku is from the lashon of taremes, like we see that later on they complained and they specified what they were upset about. We can't say that that's what Rashi is coming to negate, because if that's the case, then the main thing is missing from the Rashi, which is explaining that Vayitzaku means Vayispalalu. Rashi should have written Vayitzaku and then explained Vayispalalu. It means they were mispalal and not that they were complaining. So that's questions number 1 and number 2. Number 3, on the other hand, if there is a need to explain their cry and tefillah to Hashem, then Rashi should have done so the first time we learn about the cry and tefillah of Yidden to Hashem in Parsha Shmos, where it says that while in Mitzrayim, Vayizaku, they cried out, Vatal Shavasam El Elikim, and their cry went up to Hashem. And we know that this was a tefillah and not a cry from the shibud. This wasn't the Yidden crying out because of the difficulty, because it already says that earlier in the pasuk. It already says earlier in the pasuk, Vayonchu bnei Yisrael min aveda. So this must be a cry to Hashem, a tefillah. So there Rashi should have told us, Tafsu imanus avaisam. If there is a need to explain it, it should have been explained there. And number 4, how does it make sense to refer to tefillah as umanus? And in addition, besides this question, in Pshuta Shemikra, the umanus of the avis was to be shepherds of sheep. After writing Tafsu umanus avaisam, then Rashi continues and explains, Ba'avram hu eimer ba'avram, he says, Ela mokim asher amad sham, where the word amad refers to tefillah. By Yitzchak it says L'suach basada, which also L'suach refers to tefillah. And by Yaakov it says Vayifka b'mokim, and Vayifka refers to tefillah. So now we have a 5th question on Rashi, and that is, why does Rashi bring psukim where the tefillahs of the Avis are only hinted to, and not psukim where their tefillahs are written clearly? And we'll go through each of the Avis. By Avram, we have a pasuk earlier in Parshas Lech Lecha, earlier than the pasuk that Rashi brings, which is from Parshas Vayera, where it says, Vayiven sham mizbeach la'Hashem, vayikra b'shem Hashem, when he camped by Beis Kel. And that's indeed the pasuk that's brought in Mechilta. And also afterwards, in the same discussion of the pasuk that Rashi brings, beforehand, before it says Alamokim Asher Amacham, we have the whole story of Sdem and Amira, where Avram was davening over and over and over again, many times, that Hashem should save Sdem and Amira. So why doesn't Rashi bring those psukim? The Rebbe also points out that the fact that Rashi brings a different pasuk than the Mechilta doesn't indicate that he had a different girsa, because since Rashi doesn't mention that it comes from Mechilta, it could be he's switching the pasuk, that it should be a pasuk that fits better with Pshuto Shemikra. Then if we move on by Yitzchak, we have by Yitzchak it says Vayater Yitzchak, which as Rashi says it means Hirba v'hifser b'tfilah. Again we find by Yitzchak tefillah written clearly in the pasuk. And then by Yaakov we have Yaakov davening when he wanted to Hashem to save him from Esav, where he says Atzileini no miyad achi. So why doesn't Rashi bring these psukim? The explanation of all of this is the difficulty that Rashi is coming to answer over here is what's the reason? What's the reason over here to be mispalel and with a tzayka to Hashem? Hashem already promised the Yidden that they would come to Eretz Yisrael, and so Memonavshach, if they believe the promise that Hashem gave them, if they believe the promise of Hashem, there's no need to be mispalel. And if they didn't believe the promise of Hashem, then there's no point to be mispalel. And so therefore Rashi explains Tafsu Umanos Aveisam, meaning that this that we find tefillas by the Ovis, it wasn't just when there were circumstances that brought the tefillah, whether it's because they needed something or wanted something, or as a form of thanking Hashem, but rather this was their umanos, that they were always mispalel to Hashem. And that's what the Yidden were doing here. And regarding a possible question that right afterwards the Yidden complained, it says over there, they said, Vayemru al Moshe al mibli ein kvarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtanu lamas b'midbar mazais asisa lanu leitzenu miMitzrayim. So there's two ways of explaining this. Either it was only after they weren't answered, or it was just out of distress. Like we know that a person could say things that he doesn't really mean when the situation is very difficult. And indeed, it makes sense to say the second answer, because afterwards Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, he instructed, tell the Yidden v'yiso. And Rashi explains, Ki daihu schus aveiseim v'ha'emuna she'aminu bi. So we see that the Yidden did trust Hashem. And so now it's also understood why Rashi brings his examples of the tefillos of the Avos. Because those tefillos, they were all in a manner of umanos, that the Avos were davening because that's what the Avos did. Which is not so by the other examples that we asked about. We said, how come Rashi doesn't bring some other examples? Where there they were mispalel, so by Avram, as explained in Rashi, that those were tefillos, either he was asking for something, he was mispalel because he saw the future, that there would be an avera done in that place. Another time he was mispalel, it was a form of thanking Hashem. By Stem and Amira, he was also asking for something. So it was either when he's asking for something or a form of thanks. And so too by Yitzchak and Yaakov, clearly Yitzchak was asking for a child and Yaakov was asking Hatzilenina. So Rashi doesn't bring those because those are not examples where we see that the Av is Davenned as an umanos. And therefore there's no question about the other times that the Yidden were mispalel. Like we said earlier on, we have that the Yidden were mispalel to Hashem, since that was asking Hashem to save them from their situation. And another time we see that Yidden davened, also there was a form of thanks. So there's no question over there why they were mispalel, because there was a circumstance that was the reason that caused them to be mispalel. It's over here where there's no circumstances that would cause them to be mispalel that Rashi is bothered. Why were they mispalel? And he explains it was tafsu umanos aveisam. And there are two lessons from this in Avodas Ha'adam. Number one, tefillah, and so too learning Torah, and so too doing mitzvahs, they have to be similar to an umanos. This means that learning is not just an order that a person should learn what he's allowed to do, what he has to do, what he's not allowed to do, but rather it should be for the sake of learning. And so too doing mitzvahs and Avodas Tefillah should not be for any goal, but rather it should all be as a result that this is a person's entire being, to serve Hashem in all of these ways. The second era is that so too when working with other Yidden, one shouldn't pay attention to the fact that bechitzonius, outwardly, the other person doesn't have a connection to Torah and Tefillah, but rather to know that be'etzem uvepnimius, this is the umanos of every Yid, Torah, Tefillah, that is received because he is from the Avos, as the children, the bottom of the ovis. That's why every Yid has it as part of his etzem and his pnimius, and it's just concealed, and it has to be revealed.